Good morning, my ladies. We're gonna watch a new video, guys. This is called How the SNES. Oh, sorry. How the SNES took over the 16-bit area. It's a mini documentary. It seems to be a cool video. It's a very small YouTube channel yet again. Francisco Ferreira, and Francisco has only 3,000 subscribers, and also only 1,500 views on this video. I wanted to check it out regardless. I'm sorry the green screen is up already because I taped the video earlier for the main channel, which is gonna release next Sunday, guys. Make sure to check it out. Okay, let's check out Francisco's video. This looks very, very nice, and I wanted to check it out with you guys. So let's see.
During the third generation of gaming, Nintendo dominated the market, this being their first entry into home consoles.
Oh, I should probably say before this starts, I never played SNES. I played SNES. I never played NES. SNES was the first console I had. I'm 36. For all of you who do not know me, hello, my name is Nico. I'm 36 years old. Thank you for, watching this secret YouTube channel of mine. And I hope you enjoy it.
Because of Nintendo's late entry into this generation, they managed to bring so many games into people's homes. The United States now has a restored interest in gaming. This opened the door to many competitors to jump in, particularly Sega with the Genesis, NEC with the TurboGrafx
Never had a
16,
Sega.
and SNK with the Neo Geo. These consoles had a pretty large head start to this competition, while the NES was quickly becoming dated. But this time, Nintendo has so much more knowledge on the gaming industry and such a ridiculous lead in sales that their next release was bound to perform incredibly well. So now it's 1991, and the Super Nintendo Entertainment System is finally here. This is how the SNES took over the
1991, I was 3 years old. Holy smokes. I don't even know when I got my SNES. It must have been like 1995 then, of 1994, 95, 6-7 years maybe.
16-bit era, but it wasn't easy.
Oh, this video is so well made. It's crazy how this has only 1,500 views. What is happening?
The SNES was a large departure from what the NES was. The system was shrunk by a lot in every single aspect, and now the console is allowed to shine in its exterior design, as it no longer needs to convince people to give it a second chance. The gaming industry is doing much better by 1991, and as such, the SNES can start looking like a gaming console in order to address the competition directly this time. However, Nintendo wasn't ready to brand the SNES the same as their Japanese counterpart, so we received the Super Nintendo Entertainment System instead of the Super Famicom. With this release, Nintendo opted to keep different designs for both regions, noting that the
Wait, I had a Super Famicom then. I thought it was an SNES. It's the same, right?
Famicom just looked too soft for American audiences. This is still a very hefty console, and at a quick glance, it retains a lot of the same simplicity from the NES. On the front, you will find two controller ports, now nicely centered and symmetrical. On the back, there is a multi-out port because Nintendo transitioned into stereo audio from a composite connection. You will also get the same RF port and a switch for going between channels 3 and 4 when using an RF connection. Then there is the barrel connector for power. On the top, you will find a power switch and a reset switch. No more do we press any buttons on our home consoles.
You guys remember when you had to, when something didn't work and the game didn't load, and then you had to unplug the game and blow into the cartridge? Because there's I don't know, some dust or whatever, and then you had to blow out the dust and then put it back in and then try again. It's such a classic move for these Nintendo cartridges.
Then there's the new cartridge slot on top, and while we no longer have the ability to just pull out our games when we are done, now we have an eject button in the middle to facilitate switching between games. This is important because now we have a very different cartridge system, and a more reliable one at that. These cartridges are even smaller than before, even if it wasn't a high bar to clear. They did shrink significantly on the outside, but it's a much bigger difference when you open these up. Although cartridges that need to save data still require a save battery, this is the unit that powers the circuit that keeps the saves active on any given cartridge, while it isn't receiving power from the console directly. These batteries were rated to last around 10 years, which means that everyone who hasn't replaced the batteries on their cartridges already needs to do so in order to maintain the save function. But you will still lose your saves every time that you want to swap batteries anyway, because when the circuit that keeps your saves is no longer receiving power, even for a moment, it immediately loses its data. However, these cartridges range between 256...
To be honest, a lot of these games didn't even have saves. I remember that some of the games, like Aladdin, for example, correct me if I'm wrong, if you played this game and you wanted to make through the game, you had to play it in one go. And you had like 3 lives or 5 lives or something, and you had to play through it in one go. And as soon as you lose all of your lives, you have to restart from the very beginning of the game, as far as I remember.
Kilobytes and 6 megabytes of data. Not all cartridges needed to hold that much data for games, so Nintendo still kept the 256 kilobyte cartridges around for smaller games. These cartridges also feature a smaller set of pins, which means that we have a new connection system. The SNES is not backwards compatible with NES cartridges. There's also this expansion port, which was seldom used this time around. Very few accessories were made that could take advantage of this port. Nintendo did release the Satellaview, which allowed you to download games, magazines, and more to your SNES through the accompanying cartridge, but this one was exclusively released in Japan. There was also an exercise bike that allowed players to play by cycling on it, which is yet another hilarious accessory that not many people purchased. But the unreleased SNES CD add-on is truly an interesting one. This was idealized to support disc-based media and games, but it never came to fruition. And so this would come back to bite Nintendo very, very hard in the near future, as this became a bridge that they'd wish they'd never burned. But with performance improvements aside, the controller is my favorite change from this generation. This controller is only slightly wider than the original, but we now have fully rounded corners, which helps greatly in terms of ergonomics.
Very much. I think it's such a neat design. I really, really liked it. The Nintendo 64 controllers, no joke, were an abomination. Like, I have no idea what devil from hell designed the Nintendo 64 controllers. But I hope this guy never designs a controller ever again. They were just so terrible. And these were just much better. I understand that you have to have an analog stick and everything. It has to be a little bit reimagined, but whoever designed it, dude, just never do it again.
We now have a set of 4 buttons with ABXY, and these to have different feelings between AB and XY. This was likely to give consumers an easier learning curve and to reduce the chances that we will press the wrong button, because they do feel different. We know what to feel when we press these buttons. The D-pad is much different than the NES's D-pad because it is now larger. It has a matte gritty texture and has less travel while requiring considerably less pressure to press. This is something I never thought about until now, but these feel completely different. This change made me realize that I prefer the softer D-pad because it makes it more usable for longer periods of time, and in certain games, I believe I can execute diagonals much more easily. We also get these new shoulder buttons, which feel fine, if not quite nice considering its very small form factor. And finally, I cannot ignore this change, but the start and select buttons feel much better to reach and to press overall. I have very positive things to say about this controller, and most people at that time did agree with that sentiment as well. The design of the SNES did mark some significant improvements for the 4th generation of gaming. That's just a small part of what allowed Nintendo to lead this generation, with Sonic the Hedgehog being an extremely popular title for the Sega Genesis, even if it did release closer to when the SNES came out. Nintendo needs to publish not just a good game, but one of their best games if they hope to catch up. So these are the games that dominated the 16-bit era.
Oh, here we go. Here we go.
I'd like to begin by saying that the reason why Sega most likely had to make that push into the next generation sooner is because they were lagging behind in sales with their Master System console, selling just
Sega
1/6
completely stopped selling at some point, right? Like I have never had a Sega system, but and I also don't know anyone who had one, to be honest. I don't know. I think they don't sell anymore anyways.
what the NES did. So Sega released their Genesis system in 1989, which was 2 whole years before Nintendo eventually caught up, as it was designed to compete with
16-bit.
and to be better than the NES. But the issue with the Genesis is that its best games released well after the SNES itself did. So even if the Genesis did launch with much more graphically impressive games than those on the NES, these were not the games that helped define this generation. There were a lot of beat-em-ups released at this time, which,
Great
while it
games.
is a genre of
Turtles
games
in
that is
Time.
well loved, it was most of what Sega's lineup looked like, which meant that there wasn't
that's not
too much
Turtles in Time,
excitement
but,
for getting the next game that was just released. Sonic the Hedgehog was the game that really attracted gamers because you're moving at much greater speeds, unlike how you would in most games. This is a very fast, momentum-based platformer that looked stunning and had so much going on, as well as featuring more replayability than anything else they had before. For a while, the Genesis was outselling the SNES when it was finally released, which meant that it wasn't that easy for Nintendo to catch up. However, their initial lineup consisted of 5 games: F-Zero, Gradius 3, Pilot Wings, SimCity,
F-Zero was a fantastic game. I remember when I got my SNES, I had F-Zero X, I had Turtles in Time, and Zelda. But unfortunately, there was not a release title there. But Super Mario World I played as well, of course. The other 3 I didn't play. But the games I played on, like every single Nintendo game was a banger. There was not a single bad game. Like, we bought these games and every game was good. Everyone.
Super
Everything.
Mario World. But from this lineup, we have to talk about Super Mario World. Besides the graphical improvements introduced to the 4th generation, there were many gameplay improvements that brought the Mario games back to everyone's homes. Mario is not as slippery, meaning that the precision at which you can move Mario is improved. There's a new Yoshi mechanic that allows you to ride on top of Yoshi and allows you to
really
go further
cool
up in
game,
the air,
holy
which can
smokes,
be
yeah.
used to avoid enemies, reach optional spots, or simply overcome other
Still
enemies.
speedrun
You can
up
also
to this
consume
day.
some of your enemies as an alternative, though that won't work for all of them, and for some, you can even turn them into projectiles. There are also climbing mechanics for more creative level designs. These are just some of the newer mechanics introduced, and I'd argue that the game is technically slower than before, but it's more fun. F-Zero was a pseudo 3D racing game that showed the capabilities of the SNES, with this particular aspect of the SNES titled Mode 7 scrolling. The simplest way that I can explain this is by describing a flat 2D image. Let's assume that we have this entire map drawn for a game. Depth effects would have to be baked into the sprites drawn in any given moment, but Mode 7 allows this 2D image to skew, rotate, shear, and move around to adjust to the input of your controller and to the position of your character.
Actually,
this is what creates
genius.
that pseudo 3D style. Even if it was all drawn and the rendering is done entirely by the SNES's Mode 7 feature. But of course, Mode 7 was used very creatively for a lot of different games. With games and technology like this, the
You had
Genesis
all of these overworld things, right? When you played Terranigma or like Secret of Evermore, and there were these like overworld views where you traveled the world, and these were all made in Mode 7. I remember that, you know, or when there was a fast travel with like a spaceship on Final Fantasy or whatever, that was also Mode 7. They used it for so many things if you think back, right?
needed an additional boost in momentum before Nintendo stole all of it away. Sega released a lot of Sonic-related games such as Sonic & Knuckles, Sonic Spinball, Sonic 3D Blast, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and Sonic the Hedgehog 3 just to capitalize on Sonic's success thus far. But other games like Golden Axe, Shining Force 2, Mortal Kombat 2, Contra, Streets of Rage, Castlevania, and yes, many more, did help the Genesis maintain quite a bit of momentum, with another aspect being that the Genesis was marketed more towards teenagers, while the SNES was marketed more so to children. This becomes apparent when you see that there are censorship issues for games like Mortal Kombat, as blood effects were removed entirely, though this is just one example. However, Nintendo answered with some absolute classics that were easily some of the best games that you could buy in the early to mid-90s. Games that Sega simply couldn't match in their scope and appeal. Final Fantasy VI, or 3, as
I have
originally called,
not played this, of course, but you know, it's a classic for sure.
outside of Japan, was one of those games that is spoken of very, very highly to this day. And with good reason. This was and still is one of the best Final Fantasy games ever created, and easily the best one from the 16-bit era of Final Fantasy. Chrono Trigger is yet another fantastic game that was viewed very well back then, and to this day many people still clamor for a proper PC port or remaster, including myself. Kirby's Dream Land 3 is a very unique game that manages to look incredibly stylized and cartoonish while still looking so vibrant and detailed. The exact same can be said about Legend of Zelda: A Link.
This game is one of the best video games I've ever played in my life, you know? And it
To the
released
past,
in
which is
like
a very beloved game in
1991.
the series. Not to mention that games like Donkey Kong Country did look very realistic because of its art style and
Also
managed to
Donkey
sell
Kong, of course.
incredibly well.
Absolute insane video. Look at this lineup. Look at the games they released on this console. It's just banger after banger after banger, classic after classic after classic. They didn't stop.
Mega Man X, Super Metroid, Yoshi's Island, Street Fighter 2 Turbo,
Yoshi's
Earthbound,
Island.
Super
Oh,
Mario Kart, and so many
Mario
more
Kart.
were absolutely among the many games that
Oh
made
my
it very
God.
difficult for the
These
Genesis to
games.
compete by the end of this generation. Sega Genesis games were considered to be good, but the SNES had the best games, better than just good. There was just so much more to play by the end of this generation. This was a pretty close competition for both of them. The Genesis sold roughly 30 million units worldwide, while the SNES sold 49.1 million units. The other competitors such as Philips with their CDI, SNK with their Neo Geo, NEC with the Turbo Graphics and PC Engine systems and such dropped out of the competition. But with these players out of the game, there were so many that took their spots. By 1995, Sega released their Saturn console, but even worse for Nintendo, Sony released the PlayStation later that same year, to massive success worldwide. Nintendo did
Never had a
manage to
PlayStation
overwhelm
until the PlayStation 4 released. And even then, it took me quite some years after release to get like the PlayStation 4 as well.
Sega this generation, but particularly everyone else who simply couldn't keep up. The 16-bit era was marked by the SNES's incredible games that remained exclusively on Nintendo's platform, even if Nintendo had to work a lot harder this time to remain at the top. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System absolutely reigned supreme this generation, marking a second victory in the console race in a row that Nintendo claimed. But already, as Sega and Sony made their entry into the 5th generation of
This
gaming,
controller,
Nintendo had been working on their response. Because the SNES
boy.
released so much later, they had less time to fully polish this one. They needed to act now. So as expected at this point, Nintendo came in quite late to the next generation of gaming. Even then, many people classify this follow-up as their favorite. There were many highs and many lows. We will talk about this one very soon. Now thank you so much for watching. Leave your suggestions in the comments for future bite-sized documentaries. And until next time.
That was actually a really good video. I'm gonna, as always, get you the channel down below if you want to check it out yourself, of course. That was very well made. I should maybe talk more about like the early Nintendo era, because I really I have so much good memories with this. I played all of these games and I love them very much. Obviously also the N64 stuff, and I'm just a huge, fan. And even Nintendo is like, arguably you should criticize this company because they do a lot of like crazy devilish shit. They're demons, but they make good games. Unfortunately, they're demons that make good games. So, fuck. Consume product, guys. Thanks for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.